The words struck her with the force of a physical blow, each one a shard of ice embedding itself in her soul. I, Kalen, Alpha of the Black Moon Pack, reject you, Elara. He stood before the assembled pack on the great ceremonial stone, his face a mask of cold fury, his voice booming through the sudden shocked silence of the clearing. His gaze swept over her, a contemptuous dismissal of the slight curve of her belly beneath the thin fabric of her dress. He didn't just look at her, he looked through her as if she were a ghost already. This bond is broken. The child you carry is not of my blood, and you are no longer welcome on these lands. You are an exile, a traitor. The searing agony of a severed mating bond ripped through her, a phantom claw tearing at her spirit, so intense it stole the air from her lungs and bleached the color from the world. A collective gasp rippled through the wolves behind him, their eyes a mixture of pity, confusion, and contempt. He had been her world, the other half of her soul, the constant warm thrum in the back of her mind. In a single, brutal declaration, he had shattered it all, leaving her in a silence so profound it was a torment, utterly, terrifyingly alone. A low, guttural snarl was torn from her throat, a sound of pure animalistic pain that she barely recognized as her own. She clutched her stomach, a desperate instinctual gesture to protect the tiny, innocent life within her. His life, his child, the proof of their love, the culmination of their bond. How could he deny it? How could he look at her and see a stranger, a liar? Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a single friendly face, a single ally, but found none. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. She saw Lyra, the pack's beta female, standing just behind Kalen's shoulder, a flicker of a triumphant smirk on her lips before it was smoothed away into an expression of concerned sympathy. The sight was a small, sharp sting beneath the crushing weight of Kalen's betrayal. The sky, which had been a placid gray only moments before, seemed to answer her anguish, darkening ominously as a cold wind whipped through the clearing, carrying the first heavy drops of rain. It was as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the injustice, for the lie that had just been told. "Get her out of my sight," Kalen commanded, turning his back on her as if the act of looking at her was a physical strain. The gesture was more painful than the rejection itself, a final, complete erasure of their shared history. Two of his enforcers, wolves she had known her whole life, moved toward her. Jorik and Fen. She had played with them as a cub. Jorik's mate had helped her weave the crown of flowers she had worn at her mating ceremony. Now their expressions were grim, their eyes holding nothing but cold duty. They grabbed her arms, their grips bruising and impersonal, and began to drag her toward the edge of their territory. She didn't fight. The strength had been scoured from her limbs by the shock and the supernatural agony of the broken bond. It felt as if half of her had been amputated without anesthetic. Her feet stumbled over roots and stones, her thin shoes offering no protection. The rain began to fall in earnest now, plastering her hair to her face and soaking her dress until it clung to her like a second skin, chilling her to the bone. They didn't stop until they reached the ancient moss-covered stone that marked the boundary. Beyond it lay the wild, unclaimed lands, a place of rogues, predators, and death. A place mothers warned their cubs about in hushed tones. They released her abruptly, and she fell to her knees in the mud, the impact jarring her teeth. "Don't come back," Jorik growled, his voice devoid of the warmth it had once held. "The Alpha's word is law." Then they turned and melted back into the trees, leaving her in the burgeoning storm without a backward glance. For a long time, she simply knelt there, the cold mud seeping into her clothes, the rain washing away the silent tears tracking down her cheeks. The pain in her chest was a living thing, a ravenous creature devouring her from the inside out. But beneath the pain, beneath the layers of shock and grief, a tiny flicker of defiance sparked. It was the fierce, primal instinct of a mother. It was for her baby. She had to survive. For this little life that Kaylin had so cruelly cast aside, she had to find the strength to stand. Pushing herself up on trembling legs, Elara took a staggering step away from the lands that had been her home, and then another. Each step was an act of rebellion. She had no destination, no plan, no food, and no shelter. Her only thought was to put as much distance as possible between herself and the source of her agony. The forest grew thicker, the trees crowding together, their branches clawing at her like skeletal fingers. The storm intensified, the wind howling like a mournful wolf, its cries echoing the desolation in her soul. Rain came down in blinding sheets, and thunder cracked overhead, so loud the ground seemed to shake beneath her feet. She walked for what felt like an eternity, her body screaming in protest. The phantom ache of the bond was a constant thrum beneath her skin, a cruel reminder of the connection that was now a source of unending pain. Physical exhaustion settled in, a heavy weight on her shoulders. She was so cold, so hungry. Her baby needed nourishment, and all she could offer was a hollow emptiness and a heart full of terror. Despair began to creep in, a cold, insidious tendril wrapping around her heart. Was this it? Was she to die out here, alone in the dark and the cold, a forgotten ghost of the Black Moon Pack? Finally, her legs gave out. She saw a large rocky overhang, a shallow cave carved out of the hillside, and scrambled toward it, collapsing at its base. Her body was too weak to move another inch. Curling into a tight ball, she pressed her hands against her belly, trying to shield her child from the relentless cold. She thought of the warmth of the pack den, of Kaylin's arms around her, a memory that was now a poisoned dart. A sob escaped her, raw and broken. She was so tired. Her eyelids grew heavy, and the roar of the storm began to fade into a dull hum. Perhaps it would be better to just let go, to let the darkness take her and her child into its cold embrace. It was a sound that pierced through her weary haze, the soft, deliberate crunch of leaves and twigs nearby. Her eyes snapped open. Panic, sharp and electrifying, seized her. A rogue? A bear? Her inner wolf, weakened and grieving, whimpered in fear. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a shape emerge from the gloom. It was a wolf, massive and imposing, larger than any she had ever seen, even larger than Kaylin in his alpha form. Its fur was the color of storm clouds, a mix of silver and deep gray, and its eyes glowed with a faint, unnerving luminescence in the dark. Fear gave way to a strange sense of resignation. This was the end. The wolf padded closer, its movements fluid and silent, a predator in its element. It stopped a few feet from her, tilting its head as it regarded her. It didn't snarl or show any sign of aggression. It simply watched her, its gaze intelligent and piercing, as if it could see right through her skin and into her broken soul. She expected it to lunge, to finish the job that Kaelin had started. Instead, it let out a soft, low whine, a sound of inquiry, almost of sympathy. Slowly, it moved closer still, until its warm breath misted in the cold air before her face. It nudged her hand with its wet nose, a surprisingly gentle touch from such a formidable creature. Her fear began to recede, replaced by a profound confusion. The wolf circled her small, shivering form once, then lay down beside her, pressing its large, warm body against her back. It curled around her, creating a living shield against the wind and rain. The heat radiating from its thick fur was a blessing, a stark contrast to the deathly chill that had settled deep in her bones. She could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of its heart against her spine, a solid, reassuring tempo in the chaos of the storm. A strange sense of calm washed over her, a feeling of safety she hadn't thought she would ever experience again. Exhausted and bewildered, Ilara closed her eyes and finally surrendered to sleep, protected from the storm by the mysterious silver wolf. When she awoke, the world was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind the clean, earthy scent of damp soil and pine. The first rays of morning sun filtered through the canopy, dappling the forest floor in soft gold. For a moment, she was disoriented, floating in a space between nightmare and reality. But the memory of the rejection crashed back into her with brutal clarity. Then she remembered the wolf. She turned her head, her muscles stiff and sore. He was still there, sitting on his haunches a few feet away, watching her with those same intense silver eyes. He hadn't left her side all night. She struggled to sit up, a groan escaping her lips. The wolf stood, stretching its powerful limbs before padding over to her. It dipped its head, and she instinctively reached out, her fingers sinking into the thick, surprisingly soft fur of its ruff. A strange energy seemed to pass between them, a quiet hum of recognition that settled something deep inside her, soothing the raw edges of her pain. As she watched, a shimmer distorted the air around the creature. Its form began to change, bones shifting and reshaping with a series of soft clicks and pops that should have been horrifying, but somehow felt natural, like watching a river change its course. The massive wolf condensed, reformed, until a man stood in its place. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with rugged features and a sharp jawline dusted with stubble. His dark hair was shaggy and untamed, and his clothes were simple and worn, leather pants and a plain tunic. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same eyes as the wolf's, a startling, luminous silver that seemed to hold ancient secrets. He said nothing, simply observing her reaction with a quiet patience. She should have been terrified. A strange man, a rogue wolf, had found her at her most vulnerable. Yet the fear wouldn't come. All she could feel was the lingering sense of safety he had provided during the storm. Who are you?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, rough baritone, like the rumble of distant thunder. "My name is Jax." He didn't offer a pack name. A rogue, then, just as she'd suspected. "You were freezing. You wouldn't have survived the night." "You saved me," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "Why?" A flicker of something unreadable, pain, perhaps, or regret, crossed his face. No one deserves to die in a storm. He gestured vaguely deeper into the woods. I have a cabin. It's warm. There's food. You're welcome to it until you regain your strength. It was an offer of sanctuary, a lifeline in a world that had turned its back on her. But trusting a stranger, a powerful rogue, was a dangerous gamble. Still, what choice did she have? To stay out here meant certain death for both her and her child. To trust him, that meant a chance at life. Looking into his silver eyes, she saw no deception, no deception. She saw a quiet strength and a profound solitude that echoed her own newfound loneliness. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly with a mix of relief and apprehension. Jax gave a curt nod. He moved to help her up, his hand closing around her arm. The moment his skin touched hers, a jolt, like a tiny spark of lightning, shot through her. It was nothing like the all-consuming fire of the mating bond she had shared with Kaylin, but it was something, a tangible, a warmth, a connection. It startled them both. He dropped his hand quickly, his expression becoming guarded, but not before she saw the surprise in his eyes. He turned away, breaking the moment. "This way," he said, his voice gruff as he started walking, leaving her to follow in his footsteps toward an uncertain future. Jax's cabin was nestled in a small, hidden clearing, so perfectly integrated with the surrounding forest it was almost invisible. It was small and rustic, built of dark, sturdy logs, with a thin curl of smoke rising from a stone chimney. Inside, it was surprisingly clean and orderly. A fire crackled warmly in a large stone hearth, casting a dancing orange glow over the single room. There was a simple wooden table with 2 chairs, a bed in one corner piled high with furs, and shelves filled with dried herbs, clay pots, and a few worn books. It was the home of a man who lived a solitary existence, but it was also the safest place Elara had been in what felt like a lifetime. Without a word, Jax gestured for her to sit in a chair by the fire while he ladled some thick, savory-smelling stew into a bowl. He placed it on the table in front of her along with a piece of dark, crusty bread. She ate with a hunger that bordered on desperation, the warm food chasing away the last of the chill from her bones. Jax sat opposite her, not eating, just watching her with that same unnerving, silent intensity. It made her self-conscious, but she was too grateful to complain. For the first few weeks, a quiet, unspoken routine formed between them. Jax was a man of few words, his presence a steady, grounding force in the chaotic swirl of her emotions. He would leave for hours at a time, returning with firewood, fresh game, or herbs from the forest. He tended to her with a gruff but gentle efficiency, making her tease from the herbs on his shelves that eased the lingering aches in her body and soothed the turmoil in her spirit. He never asked about her past, about the baby she carried, or about the raw, broken look in her eyes that she knew she couldn't hide. His silence was a gift, allowing her the space to grieve without judgment. At night, the nightmares came. She would relive the rejection, Kaylin's cold eyes, the pain of the bond snapping. She would wake up with a strangled cry, her body drenched in a cold sweat. Jax, who slept on a makeshift bed of furs by the hearth, would already be awake. He would never say anything, but he would add another log to the fire, the soft crackle of the flames a comforting sound in the oppressive darkness. He would sit in the chair across the room, a silent sentinel, until her breathing evened out and she drifted back into a restless sleep. She was getting stronger physically. The color returned to her cheeks, and the hollow look in her eyes began to fade. The baby inside her was a constant, reassuring presence, a tiny flutter of life that reminded her what she was fighting for. As her body healed, the emotional wounds remained raw. The pain of the broken bond was a dull, constant ache, a phantom limb that would never fully disappear. She found herself watching Jax, studying the quiet competence of his hands as he skinned a rabbit or ground herbs with a mortar and pestle. She noticed the way his silver eyes would soften when he looked at the fire, the way a muscle in his jaw would tick when he was deep in thought. There was a deep well of sadness in him, a loneliness that mirrored her own. One evening, as she was helping him sort some newly gathered herbs, her curiosity finally overcame her reticence. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked softly. He didn't look up from his task, his long fingers deftly separating leaves from stems. "I chose this life." "No one chooses to be a rogue," she countered gently. "Rogues are cast out." His hands stilled. He finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, and the sadness she'd glimpsed was there, stark and unguarded. "I was," he admitted, his voice low. "I defied my alpha. He was corrupt, cruel. He demanded a loyalty that went against my conscience, so I left before he could exile me." "You stood up to him," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "That took courage." A bitter smile touched his lips. "It left me with nothing." "It left you with your honor," she corrected, her voice firm. "That's not nothing, it's everything." The look he gave her was intense, and the air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding. They were two broken souls, cast out by the packs that should have been their homes. A fragile connection began to form in the quiet solitude of the cabin, woven from shared pain and mutual respect. She started to feel something she hadn't thought possible, a sense of peace. The peace was shattered a month later. Jax was out hunting, and Alara was sitting on the small porch, enjoying the warmth of the midday sun. A scent on the wind made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. It was familiar. Wolves. From her pack. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Were they looking for her? Had Kalen sent them to finish the job? Before she could move, Jax was there. He had appeared from the trees as silently as a ghost, his body radiating a dangerous tension. "Inside, now," he commanded in a low, urgent voice. She didn't hesitate, scrambling back into the cabin. He followed her in, barring the door. He moved to the small window, peering out through a crack in the shutters. "What is it?" she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Patrol," he grunted. "Two of them. They're on the scent." He moved away from the window and turned to face her. The cabin suddenly felt impossibly small. He was all coiled muscle and predatory stillness, his silver eyes narrowed. An instinct she didn't understand made her move toward him, seeking the protection his presence offered. He put a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm and steadying, and guided her toward a darkened corner of the cabin, away from the window. "Stay here, don't make a sound," he breathed, his voice barely audible. He stood in front of her, shielding her with his body. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the scent of pine and wild earth that clung to him. The proximity was overwhelming, intoxicating. For the first time since the rejection, the dull ache of the broken bond receded, replaced by a tingling awareness of the man standing before her. His protective stance, the fierce look in his eyes, it stirred something deep within her, something that had been dormant and broken. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the faint sounds of the wolves moving through the forest outside. She could hear their low growls, the crunch of their paws on the forest floor. Her entire body was rigid with fear, but Jax's presence was a solid, reassuring wall at her back. Finally, the sounds faded as the patrol moved on. Jax remained still for a few moments longer before letting out a slow breath. He turned to face her, and they were still too close, their faces inches apart. She could see the flecks of gray in his silver eyes, the fine lines etched at their corners. The tension that had been born of fear shifted, morphing into something else entirely, something charged and electric. "They're gone," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze locked on his. He didn't move away. His eyes dropped to her lips, and his hand, which was still on her shoulder, tightened slightly. He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. The thought was a shocking betrayal of the love she'd thought she had for Kalen, but it was undeniably true. She wanted to feel this man's lips on hers, to feel the solid strength of his arms around her. But then he seemed to remember himself, or perhaps remember who he thought he was supposed to be. He abruptly dropped his hand and stepped back, putting a safe distance between them. The warmth of his presence vanished, leaving her feeling cold and exposed. His expression became shuttered and grim. "You should leave," he said, the words clipped and harsh. The statement was like a douse of icy water. "What?" "When you're strong enough," he clarified, not looking at her. "This isn't a safe place for you, for a child. As long as you're near Black Moon territory, Kalen's wolves will be a threat." She understood the logic in his words, but it felt like a dismissal, a rejection. After the intimacy of the past few weeks, the raw vulnerability of the moment they had just shared, his sudden coldness was a painful blow. "Where would I go?" she asked, her voice small. "That's not my concern," he said gruffly. He turned away from her, busying himself with the fire, his broad back a clear signal that the conversation was over. The hurt was sharp and unexpected. She had started to feel something for this quiet, solitary man, a flicker of hope that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone. But he had just made it clear. He was her savior, not her companion. He had saved her from the storm, and now he was pushing her back into the cold. As her pregnancy advanced into its second trimester, Ilara began to notice subtle but undeniable changes within herself, changes that had nothing to do with the growing life in her womb. It started small. The wilting herbs she'd been tending on the windowsill suddenly flourished, their leaves turning a vibrant, healthy green overnight. A deep cut she'd gotten on her hand while chopping vegetables healed completely in less than a day, leaving behind smooth, unblemished skin. There was a warmth that seemed to emanate from her palms, a low, humming energy she couldn't explain. She felt more alive, more connected to the world around her than ever before. It was as if the life growing inside her was awakening something ancient and powerful within her own blood. Jax noticed too. She saw it in the way his watchful silver eyes would follow her, a new intensity in their depths. He saw the way the plants seemed to lean toward her when she passed, the way the fire in the hearth burned a little brighter when she was near. But he said nothing, his silence a heavy cloak around the unspoken mystery. His guardedness only increased, creating a painful chasm between them that hadn't been there before. He was polite, he still provided for her, but the tentative warmth that had begun to grow was gone, replaced by a formal distance. One evening, a fierce, unseasonable wind howled outside the cabin, rattling the shutters. A knock came at the door, startling them both. Jax was instantly on his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Rogues rarely sought each other out, and strangers were almost always a threat. He opened the door a crack, his body blocking the entrance. Standing on the threshold was an old she-wolf, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and her back stooped with age. She was wrapped in a thick cloak, and her eyes, though clouded with cataracts, seemed to see more than most. "I seek shelter from the wind, son," she rasped, her voice thin and reedy, "just for the night." Jax studied her for a long moment before grunting and stepping aside to let her in. The old woman shuffled past him and went straight to the fire, holding her gnarled hands out to the warmth. Her gaze fell on Alara, who was sitting at the table, and her eyes widened. She took a shuffling step closer, her head tilted, and inhaled deeply. "Well now," the old woman murmured, her cloudy eyes fixing on Ilara's stomach. "This is a surprise. The line was thought to be lost." "I don't know what you mean," Ilara said, confused. The old woman ignored her, her gaze sharp and penetrating. "You feel it, don't you, child? The life inside you stirring the life inside the earth. The power of the Luna Ascendant awakens." Ilara stared at her, dumbfounded. "Luna Ascendant? That's just a legend, a children's story." "Legends are echoes of truth," the mystic said, her voice gaining strength. "Your bloodline carries a rare and sacred magic, a life-giving power tied to the moon and the soil. It only awakens in a female of your line when she is with child, a vessel for creation in every sense of the word. Your old pack, their lands are suffering, are they not? A blight on the crops, sickness in the herds." Ilara's breath hitched. It was true. For the past year, the Black Moon lands had been struggling. The harvests were poor, and the deer herds were thin and weak. No one knew why. "Your presence, your magic, is what nourishes the land," the old woman explained. "Your child's father, his father knew. The old Alpha, he wasn't a good man, but he was cunning. He knew the legends were true. He sought out your mother, but she refused him. So he watched and waited for you. The mating between you and his son was no accident. It was a desperate gambit to save his pack by harnessing your power." The room spun. Her entire life, her mating to Kalen, had been a lie? A transaction? "But Kalen, he didn't know," Ilara whispered, a desperate need to believe there had been some truth to their love. "No," the mystic agreed. "The old Alpha died before he could tell his son the whole truth. He only instilled in him the absolute necessity of the union. But Kalen, proud and arrogant, saw only you, a quiet, unassuming wolf from a lesser family. He didn't see your worth. And another was whispering in his ear, poisoning his mind." A cold dread settled in Ilara's stomach. Another? The beta female. "Lyra," the old woman said, her eyes filled with a grim certainty. "She has wanted him for years. She coveted the position of Luna. She preyed on his pride, told him you were barren, weak. She convinced him that a powerful alpha like him should not be shackled to a mate who could not produce an heir quickly. She planted the seed of doubt about your fidelity, a seed that grew into the poison of rejection. She wanted you gone so she could take your place." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the truth was a devastating weight that crushed the air from her lungs. It wasn't just Kalen's pride. It was a calculated, vicious betrayal by a woman she had considered a friend. The love she had desperately clung to, the belief that what she and Kalen had shared was real, crumbled into dust and ash. He had been manipulated, yes, but he had still made the choice. He had believed the lies. He had cast her out. She looked at Jax, expecting to see surprise, perhaps even pity. Instead, his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His silver eyes were like chips of ice. "You knew," she breathed, the realization dawning on her. "You knew about the legend?" He gave a single, sharp nod, his jaw tight. "I knew." "Why didn't you tell me?" her voice cracked with the fresh pain of this new betrayal. "It was not my story to tell," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "and it would not have changed anything." "It changes everything!" she cried, standing up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. It was then that he revealed his own secret, his words falling like hammer blows on her already shattered heart. "The corrupt Alpha I defied, the one who exiled me, was Kalen's father." Ilara staggered back as if he'd struck her. "He tried to force your grandmother into a mating bond decades ago, to steal her power for the pack," Jax continued, his voice relentless. "I was young, a warrior in his guard. I tried to stop him. I helped her escape. For that, he declared me a traitor and cast me out. I have spent my life watching over your family line from the shadows, a promise I made to your grandmother. Protecting you is a duty, a penance for my failure to save her from his persecution." Duty, penance. The words echoed in the small cabin, colder than the wind howling outside. He hadn't saved her out of kindness or connection. He had saved her because she was an obligation, a mission. The fragile, budding hope she had nurtured for him, the belief that they were two lonely souls finding solace in each other, was an illusion. To him, she was just a responsibility. It was a second rejection, in its own way more cruel than the first. Kalen had rejected her as a mate. Jax was rejecting her as a person, reducing her to a task to be completed. The last of her strength seemed to drain away, and she sank back into her chair, the fractures in her heart now so deep she feared they might never heal. The days that followed were filled with a thick, unbearable silence. Ilara and Jax moved around each other like ghosts, the weight of their shared history and unspoken feelings a tangible presence in the small cabin. Ilara retreated into herself, focusing solely on the baby growing within her. The life-giving power the mystic had spoken of was a palpable force now, a warm thrum under her skin. She was a vessel of creation, a source of life, even as her own heart felt like a barren wasteland. The knowledge of her heritage didn't empower her. It just felt like another chain, another reason she had been used and manipulated. Meanwhile, 100 miles away, the Black Moon Pack was dying. The blight had spread with terrifying speed after Ilara's exile. The soil turned fallow, the river ran murky, and a strange sickness swept through the pack, leaving even the strongest warriors weak and feverish. Lyra, who had triumphantly taken her place at Kalen's side, had no answers. Her promises of a strong pack under her guidance proved to be empty. The pack members began to whisper, their fear turning to anger. They looked at their alpha, Kalen, and for the first time, they saw not strength, but failure. Consumed by guilt and desperation, Kalen's senior council sought out the old mystic who occasionally wandered through their lands. She listened to their tale of woe, her expression grim, and then she told them the truth. She told them of the Luna Ascendant, of Ilara's sacred power, and of the catastrophic mistake their alpha had made. When the council confronted Kalen with the truth, he crumbled. The realization of what he had done, not just to Ilara, but to his entire pack, was a burden too great to bear. He hadn't just rejected his mate and unborn child, he had doomed his people out of pride and foolishness. Lyra's manipulations were laid bare, and he cast her out with the same cold fury he had once directed at Ilara. But it brought him no solace. His only thought, his only obsession, was finding Ilara. He had to bring her back. He had to atone. He convinced himself it was for his pack, a desperate alpha's duty to save his people. But deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, it was the selfish, desperate need of a man to undo the greatest mistake of his life, He launched a massive search, sending his best trackers into the wildlands with a single command: find her. The scent of so many wolves approaching sent a ripple of alarm through the forest long before they were visible. Jax knew instantly who they were and why they were coming. He burst into the cabin, his face grim. "Kaelin," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "He's coming, with at least a dozen warriors." Ilara's blood ran cold. She instinctively wrapped her arms around her very pregnant belly. "He's come to kill me." Jax shook his head, his silver eyes locking with hers. "No, he's come to beg." He took a step closer, and for the first time in weeks, the wall between them seemed to crumble. The cold duty in his eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, fierce emotion that made her breath catch. "I have spent years seeing you as a legacy to protect, a promise to a ghost, but I was wrong. I see you, Ilara. I see your strength, your resilience. I see the incredible power you hold. Kaelin doesn't deserve you. The Black Moon Pack doesn't deserve you." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch was no longer hesitant, but firm, possessive. "We have a choice," he said, his voice a low, urgent rumble. "I can get you away from here. We can run, disappear where no one will ever find us. I will spend my life keeping you and your child safe." He paused, his thumb stroking her skin. "Or we can stay. We can stand our ground and face him together. I will fight for you. I will fight for us. The choice is yours." In that moment, Ilara was transformed. The broken, frightened woman who had fled into the storm was gone. In her place stood a mother, a protector, a Luna ascendant who was finally ready to claim her own power. She would not spend her life running. She would not hide who she was. She had been a victim of Kaelin's pride and Lyra's ambition, but she would not be a victim any longer. She placed her hand over his, her resolve hardening into steel. "We stay," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will not run from him, not again." A fierce, proud smile transformed Jack's rugged features. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile, and it took her breath away. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was not gentle or tentative. It was a brand, a claim, a raw outpouring of all the words they hadn't said. It was desperation and longing, respect and adoration. It was the sealing of a pact, a promise of a future forged not by duty, but by choice, by love. When they broke apart, the sounds of the approaching wolves were much closer. They went outside to face them, standing together on the small patch of land in front of the cabin. Jax stood slightly in front of her, a human shield, but Ilara placed a hand on his arm, stepping up to stand beside him. They would face this as equals. Kaelin and his warriors broke through the tree line. They stopped when they saw them, their expressions a mixture of shock and relief. Kaelin's eyes fixed on Ilara. He saw her, not as the frail, rejected Omega, but as a radiant, powerful woman, her pregnancy a testament to the life he had thrown away. The sight of her, alive and whole, with another male standing so possessively beside her, broke something in him. He took a stumbling step forward, his face a mask of anguish and regret. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Forgive me, I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. Our pack, my pack, it's dying. We need you. Please, come home. Come back to me." He reached for her, his hand outstretched, trying to reassert the claim he himself had severed. Before Jax could move, Ilara spoke, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned Kaelin's wolves into silence. "There is no home for me with you, Kaelin. The bond you broke can never be mended. She looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw not a hint of the love that had once been there, only a calm, resolute strength. "I reject you." As she spoke the words, a visible ripple of soft, emerald-green energy pulsed out from her. It wasn't violent, but it was absolute. It washed over Kalen, pushing him back a step as if he'd run into a solid wall. The grass at her feet instantly grew lush and green, and the wilted leaves on the nearby trees seemed to unfurl. It was a demonstration of her power, a final, undeniable severing. And in that same moment, a sharp, intense pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, her hands flying to her belly. The stress, the confrontation, the final emotional release, it had triggered her labor. A low, guttural roar ripped from Jax's chest. His love and protective instincts surged, overriding everything else. He didn't hesitate. In a seamless, violent motion, he shifted. His human form exploded into that of the massive silver wolf, his lips peeling back from his teeth in a deadly snarl directed at Kalen. He placed his body squarely in front of Alara, a living, breathing wall of fury. It was a primal, unmistakable challenge. She was his. Her child was his. This was his family, and he would die before he let anyone harm them. The clearing was a frozen tableau of tension. Kalen's warriors, faced with the fury of the massive wolf and the undeniable power radiating from Alara, were paralyzed. Kalen himself stared, his face ashen, as the reality of his loss crashed down upon him. He had not only lost his mate, but he was now witnessing her being claimed by another, right before his eyes, as she prepared to give birth to the child he had denied. Another contraction, sharper this time, racked Ilara's body. She cried out, sinking to her knees. From the edge of the woods, the old mystic emerged, drawn by the surge of power. She hurried to Ilara's side, her movements surprisingly spry. "It is time, child," she said softly, her presence calming. "Do not be afraid. Let the power flow through you." Jax, in his wolf form, never moved from his guard position. He was a silver statue of lethal intent, his eyes fixed on Kalen, a low growl a constant vibration in his chest. He held the entire pack at bay through sheer force of will, creating a safe, protected space for Alara. With the mystic's guidance, surrounded by the raw magic of the forest, and guarded by the wolf who had chosen her, Ilara gave birth. As her daughter took her first breath, a final tremendous wave of life energy pulsed out from Alara. It was far more powerful than the first. It rolled through the clearing, across the forest, and all the way to the Black Moonlands. The blight on the soil withered and died, the murky river ran clear, and the sickness that had plagued the pack vanished as if it had never been. The land was healed, the pack was saved. In the aftermath, the clearing was silent save for the soft cries of the newborn. Kalen looked at the tiny baby, wrapped in the mystic's cloak. He saw the tuft of dark hair so like his own, and the truth was a final devastating blow. He had lost everything: his mate, his child, his honor. The pack was saved, but his own soul was forfeit. In a gesture of ultimate defeat, he bowed his head to Jax, a formal acknowledgement of the other male's claim and his own failure. Without another word, he turned and led his shamed warriors back into the trees, his own redemption lying in the lonely duty of leading the pack he had almost destroyed. As they disappeared, Jax shifted back into his human form. He was by Ilara's side in an instant, his face etched with concern and overwhelming love. The mystic gently placed the baby into his waiting arms. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face of his new daughter, and a tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He was no longer just a rogue, a guardian, a ghost from the past. He was a father. He knelt before Alara, holding the baby out to her. She took her daughter, her heart so full of love it felt like it might burst. She looked from her child's face to Jax's, and she knew she was truly home. The agony of Kaylin's rejection, the pain of the broken bond, it was all just a faint, distant memory, a scar that proved she had survived. Jax wasn't the mate fate had assigned to her, but he was the one who had found her in the storm, sheltered her, and claimed her when she had nothing. He was the mate her heart had chosen. Months later, the small cabin was no longer just a shelter, but a home filled with warmth and laughter. The clearing was a paradise, a riot of colorful flowers and lush greenery that thrived under Alara's gentle, unconscious nurturing. She sat on the porch in a worn rocking chair, humming a soft lullaby as she rocked her daughter, Luna. The baby had her father's dark hair, but her eyes were a startling, luminous silver, just like Jax's. A familiar silver-gray wolf padded silently out of the forest, a rabbit dangling from his jaws. He dropped it by the steps and nudged Luna's dangling hand with his nose, his touch impossibly gentle. Luna gurgled and reached for him with her tiny fingers. Alara smiled, her heart swelling. The wolf's form shimmered, and Jax stood there, his rugged face softened by love. He leaned down, kissed his daughter's forehead, and then captured Alara's lips in a slow, deep kiss that tasted of contentment and forever. They were a family, forged not by pack law or destiny, but by a storm, a rescue, and a choice. Here in the heart of the wild, they were rogues, exiles, but they were not alone. They were finally completely whole.